Good morning, everyone. On behalf of CAD International, a hearty welcome to you all to the second Design Expo session, conducted as a part of International Career Fair, organized by CAD International along with Malayalam Manorama. As an architect, you design for the present with an awareness of the past for a future which is essentially unknown, quoted by Norman Foster. And on this beautiful morning, we have brought you a special program to enhance your architectural knowledge and especially on the concept of conservation of heritage. And for that, we have a very special person among us, and it is Dr. Ashok Iyer. He is a professor and chairperson of Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Dubai, along with Mr. Midun Das, who is the BIM consultant and corporate trainer based in Dubai. So without further delay, let us head straight on to the session. And I welcome Dr. Ashok Iyer and Mr. Midun Das to the platform. Welcome.
Hi. So first of all, welcome you all to this program. So today, without wasting the time, I would like to just take you to this great, amazing session from Mr. Ashok sir. So Ashok sir is actually, as Rita told, he is one of the backbone of Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Dubai. So today it's a very special day for us to have him with us. So definitely this will make a big insight to you in the architectural journey of your life. So without wasting the time, I would like to welcome sir to this program. So Ashok sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning. Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen, and I am hoping that I'm audible and you can see.
Yes, sir. It's okay. Yeah. We can see everything is perfect now.
Yeah.
So
good morning, my dear professionals from the built environment industry, students of architecture and design, young and budding professionals of architecture, interior design, civil engineering, and other important consultancy phases of the built environment industry. So what I'm, it is my honor and it is my pleasure to be a part of, I think, ICF, this, this platform which CAD International has created with Malayalam Manorama in promoting the careers in this very gloomy period that humanity is going through during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is something, which is which we are also facing as a challenge as academic educators placed in an international campus in the city of Dubai, in the Emirate of Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And there is a lot of apprehension, there is a lot of stress amongst students and budding professionals, and even experienced professionals and people who have worked in the industry and in academia, people like me, for all these years. So I'm going to take this opportunity of taking you all through a journey, and this journey is basically my journey from India to UAE. I came as a expatriate. I got a job in the United Arab Emirates. The first job I got in the United Arab Emirates was setting up the Department of Interior Design for Manipal Academy of Higher Education in 2004. And obviously, Manipal had set up its campus. Manipal was invited to set up its campus with BITS Pilani in the year 2000, 1999-2000 by the United Arab Emirates government. And both these institutions were one of the first 5 institutions to be given permission by the Ministry of Human Resource Development back in India to set up foreign branch campuses. So I came to Dubai in 2004, and obviously I'm a poor man. Academician is always a poor man. And so I decided to reside in the sister emirate of Sharjah. So the context is that of, 2 cities. And so keep these contexts in mind when I'm talking about this journey. So this journey is a personal journey. This journey is a research-based journey. This journey is also a journey of an academician. So I'm going to take you through this in the next 45 odd minutes. And once I have done that, I'm expecting some, I'm going to be expecting some interesting questions from each one of you, and I'll be taking that. So welcome to School of Design and Architecture. We've got a very interesting acronym, SODA. So back in my native, I'm a native of Kerala. So back in Kerala and back in the state of birth from where I was born, that is the city of Mumbai and Maharashtra, I think the acronym SODA has got a very interesting connotation. But we are very happy with this acronym. And at our school, we offer a range of programs. So we've got a range of bachelor's programs from interior design to architecture to design management. This academic year, we have also started fashion design, which is not updated in this slide. We've got 2 master's programs in interior design and sustainable design, and an array of certificate programs. And I have to tell you all one thing, that the fact that School of Design and Architecture is where it is, the fact that Bachelor of Architecture is our flagship program for the entirety of Manipal, Dubai, amongst 38 odd full-time degree programs, and the fact that we are recognized by an international accreditor. One of the big plus points we have is we are associated with CAD International, and the trainers of CAD International have been coming since 2011-12 to School of Design and Architecture, and our architects, our interior designers are being trained by them. And many of our architects and interior designers who are working worldwide are doing that courtesy the edge we have got because of the training that we receive through CAD International. So our architecture program is not only accredited by Council of Architecture, but we are also the first school of architecture all over India, amongst 500 odd schools of architecture in India, to be accredited by Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologies. So I just thought that I should give you all a professional impetus to what I am and why I am sitting here and I'm giving you all a presentation on your future careers. So let me now come back to that story, the story of United Arab Emirates, the story of the sister emirate of Sharjah, where I live. So I just wanted to put it in context. So I took a map from a very basic geography book, and this is the United Arab Emirates. Okay, I have not put it in context with any other country. So there is this country borders Saudi Arabia on one side. This country borders Oman on the other side, but I have not put any of those countries in context. I just wanted to give you all a perspective of United Arab Emirates. So United Arab Emirates has got 7 emirates. Like India has got 30 odd states, and the states are increasing only in number. United Arab Emirates, lucky for them, they were established. It's a very new country. They just celebrated their 50th year of their foundation of this union, United Arab Emirates. And there are 7 emirates that form the United Arab Emirates. So the big brother is Abu Dhabi, and then you've got the shining jewel amongst United Arab Emirates. Everybody thinks that Dubai is UAE, and UAE is inside Dubai. No, Dubai is just a small emirate inside the United Arab Emirates. And next door to Dubai is the sister emirate of Sharjah. You can see it in green. The interesting thing about Sharjah is that there are 2 or 3 pieces of Sharjah. So the sister emirate of Sharjah has got 2 or 3 parts that are there floating around the entire United Arab Emirates. Keep that in perspective. And then you've got smaller emirates like Ajman, Al Quwain, Ras Al Khaimah, and Fujairah. So that is the context of the United Arab Emirates that I just thought I should put it in perspective. Now, if you look at the same United Arab Emirates in a historic map, if you look at the same United Arab Emirates in a historic map of 1935, you will realize that it's very different. Okay, this was a desert territory, and this territory had tribes. So you can see Sharjah territory, Joasim tribe; Dubai territory, Bin Yas; territory of Abu Falah, ruled by Sheikh of Abu Dhabi. So these were this entire terrain of the Middle East that we call the Gulf region till the 1960s were nothing but pure desert, and there were a series of tribes, and these tribes were having strifes with each other. They were called as the trucial states. That means there needed to be a truce, and that truce was being done by the master of the world at that point of time, the British, who were also masters of India till 1947, when we got our independence. These tribes were fighting amongst each other, and there was a truce because of the British. So keep this in context as I am talking to you. And as I move forward, and there, in this story, I'm going to bring in one architect. Okay, there was an architect who was living in Britain. His name was John R. Harris, and his company, JRHP, John R. Harris and Partners, is still existing. We have one of the directors of John R. Harris and Partners who comes and conducts working drawing, specification, and quantities for our architecture students. So this character, John R. Harris, lands in Dubai. Lands in Dubai in 1958 is what a book says. The interesting thing is he doesn't land in Dubai. He lands in Sharjah because Dubai did not have an airport. Okay, you think about it. In today's day and time, people think that Dubai is a country and United Arab Emirates, including Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, everything is inside Dubai. That's the perception. The reality is Dubai is an emirate within United Arab Emirates. Everyone thinks that when they think of United Arab Emirates, the only airline they think about is Emirates, and the airport is Dubai Airport, the largest airport in the world, the airport that had beaten Heathrow, London, on the total number of passengers. Yes, and in today's time, the largest amount of connecting flights that go out of any central hub is Dubai. Think about it, in 1959, when John R. Harris, this budding architect, landed in this country, he landed in the sister emirate of Sharjah, because Sharjah was the first emirate, not only in United Arab Emirates, but Sharjah was the first point in the entirety of the Trucial states. In Trucial states includes UAE, current day UAE, it includes Oman, it also includes parts of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which was under the British. And Sharjah had the first airport in this region. Okay, so John R. Harris lands in Sharjah. In this photograph, you can see that very interesting on the backdrop below the wing and the cutout of John R. Harris, you can see a triangular area, and there is a small hut-like feature you can see. Okay, remember that. Okay, and from here, John R. Harris, there were no roads, etc. He just got into a vehicle. It was Macadam Road, and he drove into Dubai. He met the then ruler of Dubai, who happened to be the father of the current ruler of Dubai, and Sheikh Rashid. And the rest is history. What John R. Harris did was he created the footprint for the urban city of Dubai, and to that extent, he also is considered as a precursor for the urban development of Sharjah. And the rest is history. John R. Harris also became a point in history for the entire Gulf region, because the first skyscraper, the first tallest building in the entirety of the Gulf region, was inaugurated in 1979, which happens to be the World Trade Center. And this was inaugurated by the Queen of Britain, Queen Elizabeth, who came down. And obviously, as an architect, he had the privilege of taking her around, because the sheikhs, the Abu Dhabi and the Dubai sheikhs who had invited her, obviously could not communicate with her in fluent English, and John R. Harris obviously could have communicated. So that I've seen a photograph of John R. Harris actually taking her around the World Trade Center. So as an architect, keep this in mind, guys. Don't be static, be dynamic. You know, the fact that you're born in Kerala, you're born in Thiruvananthapuram, you are going to a college of architecture there. Your life doesn't need to be stationed around Thiruvananthapuram and Kerala and India. And I don't need to say this to natives of God's own country, Kerala, because I think we are the first natives from India, in addition to the other states of South India, which is Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, who have gone all over the world. Okay, so at this juncture during COVID, one of the most important things that I would like to tell each one of you is that bring out that dynamism within your own self. You know, I know all of us are stressed out, but you know, this is the time to bring out our dynamism. So in this storyline, what we did was in 2019, we had done 3 exhibitions, and we were in a position to come up with a publication. If you go to my ResearchGate profile and you request, I can send across this publication to the requested individual. You can go through this. It's a story. It's a bigger story of what I am trying to share with you in the next in this 40-45 minutes time. Also, one of the most other important things that I would like to tell each one of you architects is that your dynamism should come out in the form of publications, in the form of reviews, in the form of some sort of a report. Remember one thing: we are in the age and time of social media. Okay, this is a small article which that was published on with reference to the landscape of Sharjah and how landscape was playing as a bridge between the heritage and the contemporary architecture. And this was one of my experiential journeys as I reside in Sharjah. And the fact that it got published in a magazine, it is going to be there for eternity. You know, the fact that 20 years down the lane, somebody will take that magazine, they will open that article and they will say, oh, this was the thought process that was there. You can do something similar. If you're traveling around parts of India during COVID times, you don't know what is happening, but you've got a smartphone and you're taking photographs. Go into Travel Advisor, go into other platforms, go into your own Facebook, write a travelogue, write a blog that will remain for eternity. So keep yourself dynamic. That's very important. The reason is, remember one thing, the world has never been static. The story of Sharjah, the sister emirate of Dubai, is all about that. This is a 1970s photograph of Sharjah. Okay. Now, please see the context of the photograph. See the background. The backdrop or the horizon is nothing but desert. On the horizon, you can see a few G+4 story and G+3 story buildings that are popping up. On the right side of the horizon, you can see a street, a road, which is going, that is the Al-Wada street. On the horizon, in the front side of the photograph, you can see some Disneyland type of tents. Okay. Now, these Disneyland type of tents was nothing but the expo center of Sharjah. Okay. And one of these tents were still in existence when I landed in Dubai, and I traveled to the sister emirate of Sharjah on the same road. Between the background and the foreground, that road which you can see, that road is the Al Khan Road, and I traveled on that road. Okay, my sister was staying on the other end of the Al Khan Road, which is Buhra Cornish, and I actually saw that tent. And I think 2 months down the lane, that tent disappeared. Unfortunately, I was not technology enabled. That was the time when digital cameras were just coming into 2004. Sony was coming up with this digital camera, and I got the camera somewhere in November 2004, and that tent got demolished, I think, in September, October 2004. What I'm trying to tell you is that, remember one thing, when you have technology, use it for collecting data. And this is the same road. You can, whatever you are seeing on the foreground, those tents, on the upper side of the photograph, on the top panoramic photograph, which I took from my university bus, that is the same area of the I don't know. That is the same area of the expo center, and you can see the kinds of buildings that have now come up: high-rise buildings, skyscrapers. On the lower side, you can see 3 photographs. These are 3 sequential photographs of an area called Al Nada, which borders Dubai and Sharjah. I'm showing you the Sharjah side of Al Nada, and the Sharjah side of Al Nada is like a lot of rings set. You know, it's like it's like a towering inferno. So you've got this 6-lane road, and on both sides of the 6-lane road, you've got these high-rise towers. And the third photograph, the lowermost right side photograph, gives you a perspective. That's a bridge, and on the top of from the top of the bridge, I took that photograph. You can see how these towers are lining each other and so on and so forth. The reason is very simple, because poor people like me who live in Sharjah, they want to have a feeling that they are in Dubai. So they live in this neighborhood. I call it a nightmarish neighborhood called Al Nada. And but people live there. That's the way it is. And this is the urbanity of Sharjah. So this was a urban juxtaposition where we tried to look at the transport network. We tried to look at the primary roads, the secondary roads, and the tertiary roads of Sharjah. And this was done somewhere around between October 2020 and April 2021. And if you can see the pointer of my, if you can see the pointer of my of my mouse, that is the Al Nada area. So we are talking about that area. Okay, I just thought I should contextualize it and show you all that, is that Sharjah? No, that is not Sharjah. Okay, now why am I saying all this? Remember one thing, always have so I think you will need to mute, please. So the reason I'm saying I'm giving you all this juxtaposition is because of the fact that Sharjah is not what you have seen in those photographs. Those towering infernos, the Lord of Rings set is not what Sharjah is. Sharjah is all about heritage. And the part of Sharjah where I live, the heart of Sharjah, is a classic example of this juxtaposition. In the heart of Sharjah, you can see culture. In the heart of Sharjah, you can see heritage. In the heart of Sharjah, you can actually connect yourself back to history. Okay. So on the left side, you can see a photograph of the Sharjah Museum of Islamic Civilization, a sketch that I had completed in 2013. A very interesting typology. This is again an adaptive reuse typology. This is not a historic building. This was a building that was designed and constructed in the mid 2000s, 2005 to 2008. It was constructed as a marketplace, Al Majara Souk. Unfortunately or fortunately, it could not work as a souk. It was shut down and it was lying empty for a period of 5 to 6 years. And then it was converted into a very beautiful museum. On the right side, you can see the actual fortification. We call it the Long Wall, the heritage wall of Sharjah. And this was in April 2013 when I was waiting. I was waiting for some of my master's students to come in, and we were going into that festival. And as I was waiting, I said, why waste time? Let me make an ugly sketch because ugly sketches are very interesting. That's the way it is. So what is Sharjah all about? In 2004, when I came, I was shocked. These are two photographs that were taken in October or November 2004 with my first digital camera, which was a Sony camera, which gave a 10 megapixel output, or a 5 megapixel output. Okay, and think about it. You have the Sharjah ruler's palace, which is now the Sharjah Art Museum, which is there on the foreground, and just 9 inches, abutting it by 9 inches, with a gap of 9 inches to 12 inches, there was a hideous tower that was coming on the backdrop. And for me, a native of Mumbai, the first city to come up with conservation rules for heritage buildings, and those conservation rules, which were part of the Mumbai municipality bylaws, became a starting point for the formation of INTAC in Delhi. And many cities in India then started bringing conservation related bylaws in their building codes. I was shocked. It was like, how can you do such a thing? And but that's the reality. That's the way it was. And as I started exploring this emirate, some interesting things started coming into place. This is a urban square, or it used to be called Bank Street because there were lots of banks around it. Very interesting piece of urban architecture, because on both sides of the road, you've got these international style 1970s, 1980s buildings that have been constructed. And the urban lines of these buildings are fairly, they follow a fairly interesting urban line. And in the middle of that, there was this small fort, a toy-like fort. Okay. And I went around the fort and I was telling myself, what is this, man? You think about it, it's like, in Kerala, you've got Bekkal Fort. You take Bekkal Fort, and which is, a very interesting scenic fort next to the coastline. And you've got Manisha Koirala during the rains coming in, and Arvind Swamy singing Tu Ire, Tu Ire. Think about it, you take that fort and you place it in the middle of Thrissur's Vadakkanathan. That historic mold and Shiva's abode, which is there in the middle of Thrissur. Let's say you put the fort in the middle of that area, and all around it you've got Thrissur's urbanity coming up. How would it look? And for me, it was like a shocker. I was telling myself, what is this? And then some interesting things came in. On the opposite side of this fort, there is this public square, and this is the way the public square was in 2004. It used to be a market, a mela, and on Fridays you had all the expatriate workers coming and sitting here, talking in Malayalam, talking in Pathani, talking in Urdu, and sharing their exchanging their stories and so on and so forth. And then I realized that, the Sharjah had a story. Apparently in the 1970s, when Sharjah was being, the urbanity of Sharjah was coming up. You can see the left photograph. The then ruler decided to demolish this fort. So he demolished the entire fort, and only one turret of the fort was left. You can see on the right side photograph, that turret was left. And then the current ruler, when he came back and he took over and he became the ruler of Sharjah, he built this fort all over again in the center of this urban square. Now, why am I saying this? The whole of Sharjah actually came into existence only in the 1970s. This is a classic example of the 1970s and Buhera Corniche being sculpted out. Buhera Corniche was not the way it was. And Marbella Palace and one of the first resorts of Sharjah being constructed. So, remember one thing, this entire urban development has happened in the last 50 years. And how did this happen? It happened because the Sharjah ruler was very dynamic. In the 1930s, when United Kingdom wanted infrastructure in the form of an airport, nobody in the Gulf was ready to give permission. And Sharjah was the first one to give permission. And they set up the first airport in Sharjah, which is the Al Mahatta Airport, which became the Royal Air Force Base. This is a photograph of the Royal Air Force Base in the 1960s. And I had no clue about it until 2008. I was busy setting up my department, setting up new programs, so on and so forth. In 2008, I invited my professor to UAE, Professor Y.D. Pitkar, who has done a lot in my life, who's like my father figure. So I said, hey, Professor, you need to come down and you need to stay with me for some time. When he landed, he told me, Ashok, Sharjah had the first airport. And it rang bells in my ears. I said, And then we went to Al Mahatta Airport, and which was converted into a museum, and it's a beautiful place. Okay, and the whole story began there. There I saw this documentary. Now again, remember I told you, document. The British were very good in documenting. So in 1937. They made a small documentary. It's called The Air Outpost. It's there on YouTube. This is done by Imperial Airways, which is the original name of British Airways. Okay, it's a 15-minute documentary. I would request you all to have a look at that documentary. It is all about the story of how an airline comes from Britain and lands in Sharjah, and from Sharjah it goes to Karachi and Mumbai. So there is the storyline, and there is the airport, and there is Al Hisn Fort. And then it rang bells in my ears. I said, okay. So when we started the architecture program in 2012, the first thing which we did was we said, we will do contextual, we will try to connect to the context. So what we did was the first batch of architecture students, we started documenting structures in Sharjah, because obviously I had a bias. I was a resident of Sharjah, and there were lots of structures I felt were in a precarious situation. This emirate is like Dubai. Today you will have a building, tomorrow the building will disappear. So there were 3 sets of buildings that we documented. The fish market that I'm talking about, which is there on the lower side of the nameplate, that disappeared exactly after this documentation. And what we also did was we documented Al Mahatta Museum. And what we decided is that our plan was to do a architectural documentation. And then as a conservation buff, I decided that, let me catch hold of my students and let's try and do a condition survey of this museum and try and submit a conservation management plan. So all this happened between 2016 and 17, but in the midst of it, the first exhibition, we hosted the first exhibition, which was conceptualized, curated, and conducted by us at Al Mahatta Museum. And the entire architectural documentation that we had done for these 3 structures and Al Mahatta. So all this was displayed at that exhibition. And what we got to know from this documentation of Al Mahatta was that Sharjah as an emirate became an urban setup because of this airport. Because of the fact that in number 3, you can see the Al Mahatta, which is there in red, and this runway, which is there in black. The entire urbanity of Sharjah is actually directional, or has placed itself because of the placement of this runway and creation of this Al Mahatta. So this is one very important layer that came out of it. Then what we did was we did a historic functional timeline of the Al Mahatta Museum, of how it is in today's day and time, and some interesting facets came out. That was Al Mahatta when British were about to leave Sharjah, and this airport was going to shut down. In the 1960s, it shut down, and Sharjah built its new airport in Daid area, Al Daid area. And this is just before that period. 1990s, that is the state of Al Mahatta. And then in 2000, the current ruler of Sharjah decided that this is going to become a museum. And what we did was we looked at various spaces of the museum, and we tried to find out what was the original utility of these spaces. Then we did a condition survey analysis, and we realized the story is the same. Mahatta was in a low-lying area, and Mahatta is still in a low-lying area. And when it rains in Sharjah, the rains of UAE are very different from the rains of India. Okay, the rains of UAE last for only 1 hour or 2 hours. But that 1 hour of rain is enough to create a flood, because many parts of UAE still do not have what we call as surface water drainage, which is an inherent part of India's infrastructure. Keep that in perspective. So when we did all these survey, and then our conservation management plan included an inventory of 78 spaces of the museum. So you can see the entire museum, we took every part of the museum and we have done an inventory of it. And we submitted it to Sharjah Museums Authority. Then our civil engineering students helped us in doing a survey of this entire site. And they said, this is like it's like a bowl, and Mahatta is sitting inside the bowl. So it's like, when it rains, the entire water comes and it fills around Mahatta, which is a very dangerous thing. So work is still in progress. On the other end, we started doing what we call as urban analysis. So by this point of time, we had 4 batches of architecture had come into Manipal. We were going for international field trips, and urban design was a very important part of our contextual way of studying architecture. And what we did was we did a detailed urban analysis of Mahatta. So you can see there is Mahatta, and that is a 2000 figure ground analysis of Mahatta. And you can see in 2018 what has happened, 2017 what has happened. Mahatta, that historic museum and that historic front is completely covered by the new developments that are coming around it. And so we gave some proposals to Sharjah Museums Authority, and can we remove the immigration building which is there in front of Mahatta Museum, and then convert it into a open air museum which can be seen from the other parts of the city, and so on and so forth. And then we had our second exhibition. In the second exhibition, some of our mechanical engineering and electrical engineering students, they built 3D models for us, 3D printers for us. And using those 3D printers, we actually were in a position to build 3D models. And these 2 neighborhoods, as well as the Emirate of Sharjah, has been printed using 3D printing technology. And that became a part of the second exhibition. So what I'm trying to tell you is that, again, be dynamic, don't remain static. Digital technology is not just for a training or a skill-based perspective. You can take it to the next level when you are doing your research. And it has helped us. And then what we did was we gave them a proposal saying that we would like to now do the urban analysis of the entirety of Sharjah. And this is a research that is still going on. What our students in 2017 to 19 did was they identified close to 9 zones in Sharjah where there were important museum typologies and cultural denominators. And what we realized from this entire exercise, so if you look at Sharjah, it's a very interesting juxtaposition. So if you have United Arab Emirates, Sharjah is touching the Persian Gulf, and it also touches the Gulf of Oman, which is the Arabian Sea. And what we realized from this entire urban analysis and juxtaposition was that because of urban cultural denominators in the form of museum typologies, there is a very interconnecting link in the form of a urban story that is being created as far as Sharjah is concerned. So this is the heart of Sharjah. That is Al Hisn Fort, that same fort that I was talking about. And next to the Al Hisn Fort, you've got this long wall which is there, the heritage wall, the sketch that I had shown you all in the previous juxtaposition. And if you now look at it from an urban perspective, you will see that, though the contemporary urbanity is overriding us or covering the entire history of Sharjah, it's still these cultural denominators are in a position to bring themselves out and tell a story. And that is the most important thing which I realized as far as the Emirate of Sharjah is concerned. So these were some of the urban analytical juxtapositions that we did in various zones of Sharjah. And I'm going to quickly take you all through. The most important part is the new airport. So you've got the Al Daid airport. You can see the runway of the airport and the airport. And next to the airport, you've got the main Al Daid highway. And on both sides of this highway, you've got 2 museums. You've got the Classic Cars Museum, and you've got the Sharjah Discovery Center and Children's Museum. And this is the 2008 figure ground of the Al Daid airport. Now, the entry to this airport was a very contorted, a scissor bridge link. which was a very, very wrong way of entering the airport. So when the Sharjah Road and Transport Department decided to build a new bridge, guess what they did? They created a new bridge, and that new bridge actually juxtaposes itself to these two cultural denominators. So when you climb up this bridge and when you're going into the airport, you can actually see both these museums. So, at a micro level, I was telling that, the travelers who are going out of Sharjah or who are coming into Sharjah, they are actually, they are in harmony with the urban cultural denominators. And keep this in mind, guys. Whenever you are doing something, whether it is research, whether it is professional work, the objectives behind it, keep that very, very simple. Don't make it complicated. The fact that we are going through COVID pandemic, oh my God, I'm not going to get a job. What's going to happen to my future? It's going to be very dark. Why are you thinking about the future? Be in the present. In the present, what are the skills? What are the professional strengths that I have? Build on it and work on it. That is the most important facet that you need to take into consideration. Remember one thing, when we took up this research, when this research started somewhere in 2004, and when it became a formal research in 2012, when the research is still going on in today's day and time, the backdrop framework for the research is very, very simple. Keep it straight and simple. And we were in a position to come up with our third exhibition. Our third exhibition did not have a lot of digital gimmickry. It was more about hands-on skills. So our students took 16 important cultural denominators and we made triglyphs. Triglyphs means 3 panels. The first panel, you can see in the foreground, the right side, the first panel is urban juxtaposition of that urban cultural denominator. The central panel was a painting done by one of these students, and the left side panel was a collage of photographs. And we did this for all 16 of these urban cultural denominators. And what came out in 2019 was an evolving hypothesis saying that the urbanity of Sharjah is nothing but a connection, invisible connection between these urban cultural denominators, which connects Sharjah from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. And our continued study, currently, I've got 2 more collaborators with me, Shagi, our assistant professor here, and Arati, who has just graduated from architecture with a bachelor's in architecture. What we did was we started doing a micro level analysis of each of these zones. And what is now coming out is we have come up with 6 zones, and that invisible line is actually now a visible line, and it's a fairly complex line now. It becomes a T. There is a further juxtaposition to it, and so on and so forth. But remember one thing: do not give up data collection at the ground level. That is the heart of Sharjah in February 2021. Every day in the evening, I come back home. On the left side, behind all those towers, one of the small buildings is mine. Okay, I've been living there for 17 odd years. I'll come back in the evening from my university and I go for a walk on this Corniche. You can see the Corniche on the lower side. These are all panoramic photographs. The entire 1970s construction is now being demolished. And you can see the April panoramic photograph. The demolition is continuing. And August, you can see it is clear. And now you can see the heritage of Sharjah. And 19th August, you can now see the old souk, the souk al-Sakar, which is now again cleared out. All the tall buildings have been demolished here. And this souk al-Sakar is now again breathing the fresh air from the sea, which is there on this side, which used to be the old port of Sharjah. So as I end this presentation. I think I've stuck to my 45 minutes. Before I say namaskaram, salam, thank you. One of the most important things that I would like to stress to each one of you who's listening to me there is that yes, we are in the midst of COVID-19. It's very dark. Economically, we are in a very dark situation. Employment rates are at their lowest, so on and so forth. Guys, just go back 100 years back. 1918, 1919, there was a pandemic like this that happened in Europe. Europe went into depression. America went into depression. We call it the Great Depression. This happened exactly after the First World War. But the world came out of it. World went through the Second World War, a horrible war. Okay, but the world came out of it. When India got independence, many people felt that India was a failed country. But India is India is one of the emerging tigers in today's day and time. So for built environment, remember one thing, there have been phases where the construction industry, the built environment has gone through a major depression in India. I can talk about the 1990s after the first Gulf World War, the first Gulf War, which took place in 92. America went into depression, and because of that, India went into depression from 1995 until 2002, 2003. For 8 years, the construction industry in India just collapsed. Okay, but that was the time when I graduated. I graduated in 1997. When I graduated as an architect, in the Times of India and Hindu newspaper, where job applications had to be there would not be a job application for an architect or a civil engineer for years together. Okay, Gulf. Ask your kith and kin who live in the Gulf, in United Arab Emirates, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia. 1998 to 2001 was pretty difficult times in Gulf for built environment professionals. There was a depression. There was a major depression. But life, it is a full cycle. It came back. Again, construction industry got moving forwards. 2009, when there was the world economic crisis, again, they said that, world over, it's going to be depression, etc. There was a dip in this region, but we have come back again. So yes, 2020, nobody expected the COVID pandemic to happen. Nobody expected lockdown, so on and so forth. But, have belief in humanity, have belief in your own self, stay in the present. Don't think in terms of the future. If you want, go back to the past. Why do you need to go back to the past? Look back at history. See how humanity has fought these travails. One of the most important things that I would request every one of you to do is strengthen your skill set. As I am talking, I myself am strengthening my skill set. Okay. Digitally, I am not very literate, but I am now strengthening my skill sets. My students have skill sets where they can not only look at softwares like AutoCAD and Photoshop, which are basic drafting softwares, but they can also look at the three-dimensional aspects of softwares, which include SketchUp and so on and so forth. But they can now start looking at softwares which look at the building information management aspects of the built environment. I'm not talking about basics of Revit and related softwares. I'm talking about softwares where true building information management is happening. That means as a designer, when you are designing something in the architectural consultancy, you have 100 consultants or 1,000 consultants from various parts of the world who can use cloud computing and who can design and integrate various technologies at the same point of time. And these technologies can be implemented on site using augmented and virtual reality and artificial intelligence. And this is happening. Please understand this. This is happening. You need to train yourself for this. Our students are training themselves in parametric softwares. Okay, why? Because the design of today requires that kind of complexity. Remember one thing, some of the most complex designs were constructed in the mid 90s and the late 90s by stalwarts like Franco Gehry. You've got Guggenheim Bilbao, you got the Walt Disney Center, so on and so forth. In today's day and time, 5 years back, we had one of the greatest pieces of museum architecture coming in this part of the world. Jean Nouvel constructed the Louvre Abu Dhabi. The roof of Louvre Abu Dhabi could never have been constructed with the current day softwares of those times. Because parametrics was there, because aviation related softwares were there, built environment professionals could tap into those softwares, that kind of design could be implemented. So remember one thing, as I end this presentation of mine, be in your dynamic best. Don't try to gain static knowledge. Go into the process of dynamically knowing, acting, and being an architectural professional. So with this, I again take the opportunity to thank CAD International and Malayalam Manorama for hearing from this, from an academician. And I'm hoping that, you're going to be asking some interesting questions before we end this session. So thank you, guys. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful story like this. So it was a really like a journey from old year to here. So it was very inspiring to everyone. And one thing in between, I just wanted to tell to everyone is that like those who are going to get into a job, these things will make what you call correct eye opening to everyone, like how to go and where to go, and then what is the purpose of going. So these three things we have to make it in mind, as if I am not wrong. So thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And anybody having any questions to ask to sir, because he's also a busy person. So now the time is already running. So he's having other engagements there. So anybody is having any questions, so you can just take a few seconds to just make a question so that sir will just answer. I'll be answering your question. So Rita, anybody from there to have a question?
I think one of the FAQs that I would like to answer is, how do you prepare yourself for this uncertain future? Okay. I know that, you may be having questions in your mind, like, am I going to have a job, or am I going to become a part of the professional industry? Do I need to go in a different area? I would suggest that, stop thinking in terms of the traditional way of looking at being a professional, getting a job, going and becoming a part of a team, so on and so forth. Your skill sets should be so innate. I'm telling you, for example, during our times, 1990s, typical, you finish your architecture or you finish your engineering, you work in the industry for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then you get into a better job, you work there, you become a partner, or after 10 or 15 years of working in a specialized aspect of the industry, let's say in civil engineering, in mechanical engineering, in architecture, in interior design, you become a consultant. That's the way people were doing. Okay. So for example, a person like me, I can become a consultant. The fact that I've got 2 decades of experience in academic administration, accreditation, so on and so forth, research, I can become a consultant. But I'm telling you, for you guys, your generation, our generation, the knowledge set that was given to us was very, very, it was, we only had that much. For you, the knowledge set is 360 degrees. Okay. So I am expecting my architectural students, when I say my, means all of you. Okay. The fact that I'm an academician, any student anywhere in the world is my student. Okay. Or any professional who has just come out. Life, you have to learn for the entirety of your life. Okay. So remember one thing, if you can if you can identify that innate skill set of yours, develop it in these 4 years or 5 years of your architecture or your engineering program, and continue working on that skill set, you can actually start as a consultant. There are students of who are coming out of Manipal and other universities around the world who finish their architecture or their engineering program, and they directly are now getting into consultancy. You know, they are doing high level certifications with with MOOC certifications that are available on net. They are doing all these master classes, so on and so forth. By the time they graduate, they have such an edge that they can actually start working as a consultant. So technically, you are an entrepreneur. You don't need to work. You don't need to get a job and seek a job and look out for a salary. You are actually working at your own level, and probably 1 or 2 years down the lane, you can actually set up a business where there are 3 or 4 people working under you and with you, not under you, with you. And so these are the kinds of avenues that I would expect the young professionals in today's day and time to get into. And don't get worried, don't get hassled. Of course, the industry is going to come back. There are going to be jobs in the future, so on and so forth. But in the present day and time, try to keep, try to be a better learner and grasp as much as you can get. That's what I would say is something which you need to do for each one of you. So I think I have only answered a question. I've given a question and I have answered a question. Okay, Vidun.
Thank you so
Hello.
much, sir. Yes. Does anyone have a doubt? Any more queries?
Yeah, good morning, sir. I'm Navneet from mechanical background. I don't know anything about architecture and all, but I am like you said, I'm a keen learner. So my question is, are the designers, architect, all these person permitted to make small or slight changes while the restoration of old monuments and all for the beautification of tourism purpose? Like, is it possible, like small changes?
Navneet, very good question. You're first and foremost, you're a mechanical engineer. Remember one thing, mechanical engineering is the core as far as built environment is concerned. Okay. The entire heating, air conditioning, ventilation, lighting, firefighting, everything is taken care by you guys. Okay. So if architects don't show you respect, God bless architects. If interior designers don't show you respect, I am raising my hands. Okay. Now, for answering your question, of course, remember one thing: any building which is a heritage building you need to have an intervention in that building for that building to be reused. Remember that. But it all depends on the bylaws. For example, in India, the bylaws for heritage buildings are very stringent. You've got grade A or grade 1 heritage buildings, grade B or grade 2, grade C or grade 3 heritage buildings. Depending on the grade of the heritage buildings, the interventions can be, for example, the lower grade heritage buildings, you can actually demolish certain parts of the buildings. You can insert certain facets into the building, so on and so forth. From a mechanical engineering perspective, let's say you want to put a lighting solution inside a grade 3 building, it is going to be very easy for you. Okay. But let's say it's a grade 1 heritage building. Let's say it is Padmanabhapuram Palace which is Padmanabhapuram Palace, which is in Tamil Nadu, but it is part of Kerala. Okay. Now it's a grade 1 heritage building. Remember one thing, as a mechanical engineer, you try to touch one tile of the building, you will have Archaeological Survey of India and intact coming and putting their sword on your neck. Okay. So there also, remember, you can intervene, but you need to be very, very sensitive when you intervene a grade 1 heritage building. Okay. So depending on the grades of building, the interventions can be very dynamic, or you will need to do surface level interventions. Remember that. And second, and the most important thing I need to tell you, a grade 1 heritage building, as a mechanical engineer or as an architect, I would have to do very less interventions. Okay, go to Padmanabhapuram Palace and you will realize that in the middle of summer, you go into Padmanabhapuram Palace, there is beautiful light streaming into the palace and it is very cool. You don't need to put any air conditioning system in that building. You're getting it. Whereas a Mahatma Museum where we are doing interventions, I would consider it as a grade 3 or a grade 4 heritage building in comparison to a Padmanabhapuram Palace. Yes, of course, for Sharjah, it is the Padmanabhapuram Palace. Remember that. But there is a lot of interventions that are required. Okay. So Navneet, I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
One more. Yeah, thank you, sir. One more thing, that is regarding artifacts, the old things. What happens exactly to the artifacts? Are they transferred to the Heritage Museum for further preservation and protection, or are they kept there as a part of that heritage architecture?
It is a big debate, my friend. Remember one thing: artifacts. The museum movement is a very dangerous movement. Also, the museum movement, which started in the formal museum movement, which started somewhere in the 18th century and 19th century in Europe, has caused a lot of desecration in countries like India, China, even in European countries like Greece. Remember, they have taken artifacts from these countries and they have, they have taken it out in very wrong ways, in very bad ways. Okay, they have ripped it out of the context and it is now kept in museums. So artifacts which are stolen or which are which damage the context, obviously that's not the way forward. UNESCO very clearly says that artifacts cannot be damaged and taken out of its original context and put into a museum. But yes, there are artifacts that need to be taken out of their context because the context may be very dangerous. For example, in today's day and time, Syria and Iraq. Okay, because of religious uprisings, what is happening is artifacts which are there in the original context are being destroyed. Now, in such a case, if there is intervention, that artifact is taken out and it is kept inside a museum, or let's say in a country like India, in Bombay, for example, let's say there is an artifact which is there in the middle of a public square and which is, let's say, 300 or 400 years old. And because of all the pollution around it, that artifact is getting destroyed. This has been done in Italy also. Michelangelo's very famous sculpture, David, it was getting destroyed because of a lot of pollution. So what they did was they took out that artifact. It is kept inside a museum. And in that same place, they have kept a dummy of that artifact. So all such interventions are done. All this should be done by following the rules and regulations that UNESCO has put in place. If you go through UNESCO World Heritage sites, you will see a lot of documents that are there. Download it and you read it and you will come to know how artifacts need to be preserved, whether it should be in the context or from a museum perspective in today's day and time. So keep that in perspective and then you can do your research accordingly. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking your valuable time for us to provide this great information on. We have learned a lot on architectural concepts, especially on conservation of heritage. So thank you so much for taking your time for this. And I would also like to thank our lovely audience for taking your valuable time to be a part of this session. So once again, on behalf of CAD International, I thank Dr. Ashok Iyer and Mr. Mithun Das and our lovely audience for having taken part in this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.